It is a brand new year, which can only mean one thing. It means that we need to do all of the 2018 reading wrap-up videos, and that's exactly what I'm here to do today. Today I'm going to be giving you guys my 2018 reading wrap-up. Hello everyone, it is Samantha and I hope you guys are having a fantastic day today and a really great start to your year. I am here today to tell you guys all about my reading year in 2018, which was probably one of the best reading years I've had in a very long time, at least in terms of enjoyment. I read a ton of books that I absolutely loved. I have some new favorites, some new authors that I love, and it was a good year. It was a good reading year. So this video is going to kind of be a wrap-up of like my statistics, all my reading stats, as well as maybe mentioning a couple of new favorite authors or books, that kind of a thing. So without further ado, let's dive into this video. In 2018, I ended up reading 56 books. 2 of these were DNFs, so I did not finish them, but I still kind of have them listed here. Including DNF books, I read a total of 23,445 pages, which averages to about 63 pages a day. So overall, that's actually a pretty good number. I was actually kind of impressed when I saw the average number of pages I read during a day. I'm not ashamed of that. In terms of genre, and I'm going to have to read off of my chart here because I'm no way I'm going to remember all of these numbers, 74.1% were fantasy, 5.6% were historical fiction, 13% was science fiction, 3% was nonfiction, almost 2% was literary fiction, and another 2% was classic books. In terms of the format of the book, the vast majority of the ones that I read were trade paperbacks at 57.4%, which that is my favorite type of format to read, so that's not shocking. The other 38.9% were hardcovers, and the remainder were like uncorrected proofs or flexibounds. In terms of book length, the vast majority of the books that I read were between 300 and 400 pages, with the second most being 400 to 500 pages. The third biggest chunk was 500 to 600 pages, and then the remainder was split between 100 to 200, 200 to 300, and then even bigger than that, 800 to 900, 900 to 1,000. So I read some chunky books, but the vast majority were kind of middle range. In terms of publishers, so like the publishers that published the books that I read, it was from like everybody. Basically, as you can see from this pie chart, there was like a ton of different publishers that I read from this year. The vast majority were actually Harper Voyager books, which was actually a little bit surprising to me. The next 2 big chunks were Penguin and Tor, which were tied. Those were less surprising, especially since I receive a lot of books from Tor and they primarily publish like fantasy science fiction, so not really shocked. In terms of book status, so where I acquired the books that I read, 50% were ones that I purchased, 27.8% were ARCs from publishers, 11% were gifts from other people, and the remaining 11% were books that I checked out from the library. In terms of where I actually physically acquired the books that I read, the vast majority were from Amazon at 29.6%, 14.8% were from Book Depository, 5.6% were from Powell's Books, 11% were from the library, 11% were gifted, as in I don't know where those came from, 27.8% came from publishers. So in terms of how many books I completed each month, March was by far my best reading month, and I remember that month, I had a vacation that month, it was my birthday month, I took a week off, and I read a lot of good books that month, so I was just like going through books like that. So that was definitely a reason for why I had such a good reading month. I read 7 books that month, but overall I averaged probably about like 4 to 5 books a month, which overall isn't that bad for me. When you have like a full-time job and you have a lot of other like responsibilities and commitments going on, it can be hard to fit in reading, so I'm pretty proud of that number. In terms of age groups, so the age group that the books that I read were geared towards, 79.6% were adult, 14.8% were YA, and the remaining 5.6% were middle grade. In terms of where the author came from, the vast majority were from the United States at 63%, 18.5% were from Canada, 5.6% were from the United Kingdom, another 5.6% were from Australia, and then the remainder was between Israel, India, and China. The other fun stat that I thought was on here was pages completed each month. Again, March was my best. I had almost 3,000 pages read that month, which is kind of mind-boggling if you think about it. That's a lot of pages. But overall, I seem to average about 1,500 to 2,500 pages a month, which is actually, it's quite a bit of reading. In terms of years published, I read a lot of new releases in 2018, so 40% of the books that I read were from 2018. The other 44% were between 2010 and 2017, and the remainder were split between the 90s, which made up 9.3%, and then the rest were like classics. You know, the remaining like 2% were split up among like classic type books. I also tried to be fairly decent about keeping track of my acquisitions. I don't think I was as accurate in the month of December and November for tracking, but overall, of the ones that I tracked, which was like 95% of the books that I acquired this year, the vast majority were fantasy at 63.8%. The next big chunk was science fiction at 13.8%. 9.6% was classics, and the remainder were like literary fiction, historical fiction, and just simply fiction. In terms of acquisition location, so where I acquired the books that I purchased this year, 43.6% came from publishers, 1.1% came from the Book Nook, which is a local bookstore. Number 23.3% came from Amazon, 2% came from a book depository, 10% came from Pals. I went to Pals a lot this year. I work downtown, so it's one of my favorite lunch locations. And then finally 19.1% were gifted. And finally, in terms of star ratings, 44.4% of the books I read were 4 stars, and then I had 20.4% were 5 stars. Like I said, it was a really, really good reading year for me this year. I read a lot of really good books, which was great because in 2017 I read a lot of terrible books, so this made up for it. 7.4% were 4.5 stars, 5.6% were 3.5 stars, 14% were 3-star books, 1.9% were 2.5-star books, and 3.7% were 2-star books, and I had 2% at 0 stars. So those are probably the DNFs. So overall, it was a pretty good reading year. I read a lot of really great books, found some new authors, and so now I'm going to tell you a little bit about them here. And finally, according to Bookly, which is an app that I use to track my reading speed and like how long it takes me to read a book, I read for a total of 427 hours in 2018, so not bad at all. I'm going to have a best books of 2018 video coming up, but some of the highlights I want to mention that were my favorites from this year were The Fell Sword by Miles Cameron, which was part of his Trader Sun cycle. Nevermore was another favorite. I absolutely love this book. Cannot wait to get to the second one. The Bear and the Nightingale Girl in the Tower by Catherine Arden were a couple of other books that I absolutely adored. Cannot wait to pick up the third book in that series this week. Grey Sister was another favorite by Mark Lawrence. Foundryside by Robert Jackson Bennett was another one of my favorites. Spellslinger by Sebastian de Castell. That whole series was amazing. That's how I finished out my year, which was a really good way to end my year. And then Strange the Dreamer was another favorite for me by Laini Taylor. So those are some of my favorites. Some of my least favorites from this year, which I will also have a separate video on, were Born by Jeff Vandermeer, Child of a Mad God by R.A. Salvatore, Wind Witch by Susan Dennard, The Seven Princes by, I don't remember the author's name right now, but it was awful and I DNF'd it. Baron by Peter B. Brett, which was a novella, which I also did not like, so that sucked. But in terms of some new to me authors that I found myself really enjoying, some of them include S.A. Chakraborty, who wrote City of Brass, which was another one that I really enjoyed this year. She was a new to me author and I really, really, really liked that book. Cannot wait to get book 2. Jessica Townsend, who wrote The Trials of Morgan Crow, Nevermore. I really, really love that book. I'd never read her before, but I was sold on her as an author because that was such a fun, whimsical book. Another new to me author that I found myself really enjoying was Robert Jackson Bennett. I've actually had City of Stairs on my shelf forever, but I hadn't picked it up. But I did pick up Foundryside this year and was blown away at it. It was a really, really fantastic book that everybody should read because it was that good. And finally, the other new to me author this year that I want to mention is Nicholas Eames, who wrote Kings of the Wild, and then his newest book, which was Bloody Rose. I found myself really enjoying his books. He writes humorous fantasy, which is one of my favorite types of fantasy books to read. I like ones with a lot of humor. So he was another new to me author that I found myself really enjoying. Alright guys, that is it for my 2018 reading wrap up. I hope you guys enjoyed seeing some of my statistics, favorites, least favorites, that kind of a thing. I would love to know whatever you guys want to say about this video. Just let me know down in the comments because I would love to chat with you guys. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you all have a wonderful day. Until next time, happy reading. Bye!